They studied a dead language for ages. The human read it like yesterday's news. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The ancient hall of the Galactic Archives towered over Dr. Nora Ellis, its crystalline walls reflecting the soft blue glow of information panels that stretched beyond human sight. She stood there, a lone human among the towering alien scholars, clutching her credentials and wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake. The consortium of galactic historians had been studying the mysterious artifacts of the precursor civilization for over 2,000 years. Their most brilliant minds had dedicated lifetimes to deciphering the complex symbols of a species that had vanished 30 million years ago, leaving behind technology and knowledge that still outstripped the combined achievements of the galaxy's current inhabitants. Despite centuries of effort, their progress remained painfully slow, with only fragments of meaning gleaned from countless artifacts. And now, in an act of either desperate innovation or patronizing tokenism, they had invited a human linguist to join their ranks. "Dr. Ellis, your arrival is timely," said Chief Archivist Telzak as he glided toward her on his gravitic platform. His elongated body, covered in pale blue scales that shifted color with his moods, towered nearly 3 meters tall, even in his seated position. 6 articulated limbs moved in gentle coordination as he manipulated the holographic controls around him. "The Council will convene shortly to discuss the Archimedean Matrix. Your presence has been requested." Nora nodded, trying to appear confident despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. "I appreciate the invitation, Chief Archivist. I've studied the briefing materials thoroughly, but I'm curious why the consortium would suddenly request human assistance after all this time." Telzak's scales rippled with faint purple streaks. Amusement, Nora recalled from her xenobiology briefings. "The consortium prides itself on thoroughness, Doctor. After 2 millennia of study, it was suggested that perhaps a different perspective might yield new insights." His voice remained neutral, but Nora detected the subtle harmonics that suggested skepticism. "I see," Nora replied evenly. "Well, I'm eager to contribute whatever I can." She followed Telzak through the massive archival complex, past chambers where scholars from dozens of species worked in silent concentration. Many paused to observe her with expressions ranging from curiosity to thinly veiled contempt. Humans were newcomers to the galactic community, having achieved faster-than-light travel barely a century ago. Despite their rapid technological advancement and cultural integration, they were still viewed as upstarts by many of the older species. The Zentari, like Telzak, had been spacefaring for over 50,000 years. The insectoid and Ravari had explored the stars for even longer. Compared to them, humanity's achievements seemed like a child's first steps. The council chamber was a perfect sphere, its interior walls covered in holographic projections of precursor artifacts. 12 senior archivists, representing the oldest and most respected civilizations in the consortium, sat in a semicircle facing a central platform where the Archimedean matrix hovered, a complex lattice of translucent crystalline structures etched with millions of intricate symbols. "The human has arrived," announced Telzak as they entered. Dr. Nora Ellis of Earth, linguistic specialist in extinct languages and symbolic systems. An Ravari archivist named Casey clicked her mandibles in what Nora recognized as skepticism. "We understand humans have a particular fascination with puzzles and patterns," she said. "Perhaps you will find this exercise stimulating, Dr. Ellis." "I hope to be of service," Nora replied diplomatically as she approached the matrix. She had studied the holographic reproductions for months, but seeing the actual artifact was breathtaking. The lattice structure pulsed with a subtle inner light, the symbols shifting slightly as if alive. "The Archimedean matrix is believed to be a repository of precursor knowledge," explained Senior Archivist Velm, a gaunt humanoid with pale, almost translucent skin. "We have spent centuries attempting to establish a coherent syntactical framework, but the symbolic system resists conventional linguistic analysis. Our most sophisticated computational models suggest over 700 possible interpretational frameworks, none of which yield consistent results when applied to the full corpus of precursor writings." Nora circled the matrix slowly, her eyes tracking patterns and relationships among the symbols. Something about them seemed oddly familiar, though she couldn't place why. "May I ask what progress has been made so far?" she inquired. "We have identified approximately 3,000 distinct symbolic clusters," replied Telzak. "Of these, we believe roughly 600 represent conceptual units related to physical constants and astronomical phenomena. Another 400 appear to be mathematical operators of some kind. The remaining 2,000—" He paused, scales briefly flashing a frustrated red. "The remaining symbols continue to resist categorization." Nora nodded, continuing her examination. The symbols danced before her eyes, complex and yet somehow ordered. There was a rhythm to them, a flow that reminded her of music, she said suddenly. "Pardon." Telzak's head tilted slightly. "The patterns, they flow like musical notation," Nora elaborated, pointing to a particular sequence. "See how these clusters rise and fall in a regular cadence? And these repeated motifs here and here, they're like refrains." The assembled archivists exchanged glances. "We considered an auditory encoding system approximately 300 years ago," said Kazasi. "The hypothesis was extensively tested and ultimately rejected. The symbols do not conform to any known principles of harmonics or acoustic transmission." "Not conventional harmonics, no," agreed Nora. "But what if we're looking at something more complex?" She turned to Telzak. "I'd like to try something. Can you display all known precursor artifacts that contain more than 100 sequential symbols?" After a moment's hesitation, Telzak gestured to the walls. The holographic displays shifted, now showing hundreds of different artifacts, tablets, scrolls, mechanical devices, and architectural elements, all covered in the mysterious symbols. Nora walked slowly around the chamber, her eyes darting from one display to another. The familiarity she'd felt earlier grew stronger. These weren't just random patterns or abstract concepts. They were telling stories. She could almost hear them speaking. "Dr. Ellis," interrupted Veln after several minutes. "While we appreciate your enthusiasm, the consortium has applied every known linguistic analytical method to these artifacts. We have constructed detailed statistical models of symbol frequency, positional relationships, contextual variations." "That's just it," Nora said, turning back to face the council. "You've been treating this like a code to be broken through pure logic and computation. But language, real, living language, isn't just about statistics and rules. It's about context, culture, history, and the messy, organic way that meaning evolves." KZZT's mandibles clicked rapidly, then Rivari equivalent of an impatient sigh. "Perhaps humans overvalue the intuitive approach because your computational abilities are still relatively primitive. Then Rivari have been applying pattern recognition algorithms to these symbols for nearly 15 centuries. If there were a purely intuitive insight to be had, surely it would have emerged by now." Nora bit back a retort, reminding herself why she was here. "With respect, Archivist KZZT, perhaps that's precisely why a human perspective might be valuable. We haven't spent centuries reinforcing the same analytical frameworks. We're looking at this with fresh eyes." She returned her attention to the matrix, studying the way the symbols flowed and interacted. "These patterns, they remind me of something I studied during my doctoral work. Ancient human logographic writing systems, particularly Chinese and Egyptian hieroglyphics." "The comparison is not apt," said Telzak. "Human writing systems, even your most complex ones, are orders of magnitude simpler than what we see here." "In complexity, yes," Nora agreed, "but not necessarily in principle." She pointed to a cluster of symbols near the center of the matrix. "These recurring elements, they function like semantic determinatives in Egyptian hieroglyphics, giving context to the surrounding symbols. And these branching structures here, they're operating like Chinese radicals, providing thematic classification." The council members exchanged skeptical glances, but Nora continued, her confidence growing as patterns began to emerge from the seeming chaos. "The precursors weren't just recording information, they were weaving it together in multiple dimensions," she explained, her hands moving as if conducting an orchestra. "It's not a linear text to be read from beginning to end. It's more like a symphony that can be experienced from multiple perspectives simultaneously." A poetic analogy, Dr. Ellis, said Velm, but hardly a rigorous linguistic framework. I'm not speaking metaphorically, Nora insisted. Look here, and here, and here. She pointed to different sections of the matrix. These aren't just symbols, they're movements in a composition. Each cluster represents not just concepts, but relationships between concepts, layered in a way that creates harmonic meaning. She turned to Telzak. Do you have a way to model multidimensional information flows? Something that could represent semantic relationships as dynamic systems rather than static mappings. Telzak hesitated, then nodded. The quantum resonance chamber might serve such a purpose, though it has never been applied to linguistic analysis before. Take me there, Nora said firmly. After a brief discussion among the council members, they agreed to Nora's request. The quantum resonance chamber was located deep within the archives, in a section normally restricted to senior researchers. As they descended through multiple levels of security, Nora felt the weight of anticipation building. She was either about to make a groundbreaking discovery or embarrass herself spectacularly in front of the galaxy's most respected scholars. The chamber itself was surprisingly small, a spherical room no more than 5 meters in diameter. Its walls were composed of a strange material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating the unsettling impression of standing in an infinite void. The chamber can model complex multidimensional relationships, explained Telzak as technicians prepared the system. It was designed for theoretical physics research, particularly the study of probability waves in subspace phenomena. Perfect, said Nora. Can you load the complete corpus of precursor symbols into the system, along with all established contextual relationships? Telzak nodded to a technician who began the process. Within minutes, the darkness around them filled with countless pinpoints of light, each representing a single precursor symbol. The lights arranged themselves in complex, three-dimensional patterns, connected by faint lines that indicated established relationships. Now, said Nora, can the system track new relationship patterns as they're identified? Of course, replied Telzak. Simply indicate the connections you wish to establish, and the model will update accordingly. Nora took a deep breath and stepped into the cloud of symbols. Let's start with these, she said, pointing to a cluster that had caught her attention earlier. These aren't just related conceptually. They're meant to be perceived simultaneously as composite units. As the technicians made the adjustments she suggested, the lights rearranged themselves, forming new patterns. Nora continued, identifying dozens and then hundreds of connections that had previously been overlooked. The constellation of symbols began to pulse and flow in response to her guidance, taking on a rhythm that reminded her of a heartbeat. This is remarkable, murmured Velm, watching as the pattern became increasingly coherent. The system is detecting harmonic resonances between symbol clusters that we never identified. Because you were looking for linear relationships, Nora explained, her hands moving through the holographic symbols like a conductor guiding an orchestra. But this isn't a linear language. It's recursive, self-referential, and multidimensional. The precursors weren't just communicating information, they were creating experience. For hours, Nora worked with the system, identifying patterns and relationships that had eluded the consortium's scholars for centuries. The senior archivists watched in growing amazement as the chaotic constellation of symbols gradually transformed into an intricate, harmonious structure. It's a story, Nora said finally, stepping back to observe the completed pattern. The Archimedean matrix isn't a technical manual or a scientific database. It's a historical account, a story about the precursors themselves. Can you read it? Asked Telzak, his scales now pulsing with excited blues and greens. Nora nodded slowly. Not word for word, not yet. But I can tell you what it's about. She pointed to the center of the pattern, where a complex arrangement of symbols pulsed with particular intensity. This is describing a civilization at its peak, masters of matter and energy, spread across thousands of worlds. And this. She indicated a spiraling pattern that wound outward from the center. This is telling how they encountered something beyond their understanding, some kind of cosmic force or entity that existed outside normal space-time. The chamber was silent as the archivists absorbed her words. KZT was the first to speak, her mandibles moving slowly in what Nora recognized as an expression of reluctant respect. In 15 centuries of study, we never determined that the Matrix contained a historical narrative, she said. How can you be so certain? Because it's not just telling the story, it's showing it, replied Nora. The structure itself is part of the meaning. The way these symbols interact creates emotional resonances that complement the conceptual information. She smiled slightly. Humans have been telling stories for as long as we've been human. It's in our DNA to recognize narratives, even when they're encoded in unfamiliar systems. This is unprecedented, said Velm, his voice barely above a whisper. If you're correct, Dr. Ellis, you've accomplished in hours what the consortium couldn't achieve in millennia. I had the advantage of your groundwork, Nora said diplomatically. And I think I had another advantage too. She gestured to the swirling pattern of lights. The precursors thought like we do, like humans, I mean. Not in the details, of course, but in the fundamentals. They understood reality as stories, as experiences rather than just information. That's why their language works the way it does. Telzak's scales shifted to a thoughtful purple. An intriguing hypothesis. The precursors' cognitive processes have been a subject of intense speculation. Most scholars assumed they must have been vastly different from any existing species, given the sophistication of their achievements. Maybe they were different, said Nora, but not in the way we thought. Not more logical or computational, more integrative. They didn't separate reason from emotion, fact from meaning, the way many modern species do. She looked pointedly at the assembled archivists. The way your scholarly traditions do. You suggest our methodologies are flawed? Asked Casey, her mandibles clicking in agitation. Not flawed, just incomplete, Nora replied. The consortium approaches knowledge as something to be dissected and categorized. The precursors saw it as something to be experienced and lived. Both approaches have value, but neither is complete without the other. The discussion continued late into the night, as Nora worked with the archivists to refine the model and extract more detailed meaning from the matrix. Word spread quickly through the archives, and scholars from dozens of species gathered to witness the breakthrough. By morning, the chamber was crowded with researchers eager to learn about Nora's methodology and apply it to their own studies. 3 days later, Nora stood before the full consortium council, not just the archivists but representatives from over 200 member species. The Grand Assembly hall hummed with excited conversation as she prepared to present her findings. Dr. Ellis, began the council chairperson, a Zentari elder named Morvac whose scales had faded to a pale silver with age. Your work has caused quite a stir in our community. There are those who question your methods and conclusions, but none can deny that you have brought a fresh perspective to our studies. The council has convened today to hear your full report on the Archimedean matrix and to discuss its implications for our understanding of precursor civilization. Nora nodded respectfully. Thank you, Chairperson. Before I begin my formal presentation, I want to acknowledge the incredible foundation laid by consortium scholars over the past 2 millennia. Without your meticulous documentation and analysis, my insights would not have been possible. The diplomacy seemed to have the desired effect, as Nora noticed several of the more skeptical council members relax slightly. She activated the holographic display, and the chamber filled with a miniature version of the pattern she had created in the quantum resonance chamber. What you're seeing is not just a translation of the Archimedean matrix, she explained. It's a representation of how the matrix was meant to be experienced. The precursors didn't simply record information. They created immersive knowledge structures that engaged multiple cognitive processes simultaneously. For the next hour, Nora guided the council through her analysis, explaining how the precursors' language operated on principles that transcended conventional linguistics. The symbols weren't just representing concepts. They were creating experiential frameworks that conveyed meaning through their relationships and interactions. Based on my analysis, Nora continued, the Archimedean matrix appears to be a historical account of the precursors' encounter with what they called the transcendent realm, a domain of existence that intersects with our universe but operates according to fundamentally different principles. According to the matrix, the precursors discovered this realm approximately 35 million years ago and spent several millennia exploring it. And what became of them? asked a council member from a species Nora didn't recognize, a floating collection of crystalline structures that chimed melodically as it spoke. That's the most fascinating part, replied Nora. They didn't go extinct, at least not in the conventional sense. According to the Matrix, they found a way to transfer their consciousness into the transcendent realm. They didn't die out, they transcended. A murmur ran through the assembly. Morvac leaned forward, his scales rippling with intense blue patterns. Dr. Ellis, are you suggesting that the precursors still exist in some form? I'm saying that's what the Matrix tells us, Nora clarified. Whether it's literally true or part of their cultural mythology, I can't say for certain. But the account is presented as historical fact, not allegory. The implications of her announcement reverberated throughout the council chamber. If the precursors had indeed transcended to another plane of existence rather than becoming extinct, it would fundamentally alter the galaxy's understanding of its own history. More importantly, it raised the possibility that the precursors might still be present in some form, watching the younger species that had come after them. This is highly speculative, objected KZ, though Nora noted that even her skepticism seemed muted compared to their earlier interactions. Without corroborating evidence from other artifacts, we cannot accept such an extraordinary claim based on a single interpretation, however innovative. I agree completely, said Nora, surprising many of the council members. That's why I'd like to apply this new analytical framework to other major precursor artifacts, particularly the Helix Codex from the Andromeda expedition and the temporal inscriptions found on Proxima Centauri 7. Telzak's scales rippled with interest. The Helix Codex has resisted analysis for over 15 centuries. Do you believe your methods could yield results where all others have failed? I believe it's worth trying, Nora replied simply. If I'm right about the fundamental nature of precursor communication, then all their artifacts should respond to this approach. If I'm wrong, she shrugged, then we've lost nothing but time, and you can all go back to thinking of humans as interesting but primitive newcomers. A ripple of amusement passed through the assembly. Even KZT's mandibles clicked in what might have been appreciation for Nora's candor. The council will need time to consider your proposal, said Morvac. But speaking personally, I find your insights compelling. Whether or not your specific interpretations prove correct, you have demonstrated the value of diverse perspectives in scholarly inquiry. Perhaps we have become too comfortable in our established methodologies. Thank you, Chairperson, said Nora with a slight bow. I look forward to the council's decision. As the formal session concluded, Nora found herself surrounded by scholars from dozens of species, all eager to discuss her methods and findings. The hostility and skepticism she had initially encountered had largely transformed into curiosity and cautious respect. She spent hours answering questions, explaining her approach, and proposing new avenues of research. It was late in the evening when she finally returned to her quarters, a small but comfortable apartment within the archives complex that had been assigned for her use during her stay. As the door slid shut behind her, she let out a long breath, feeling the tension of the past few days begin to dissipate. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. Nora activated the holographic display to see Telzak's elegant form materialize. Dr. Ellis, he began, his scales shifting to a formal blue pattern. I hope I'm not disturbing your rest. Not at all, Chief Archivist, she replied. What can I do for you? I wish to inform you that the Council has reached a preliminary decision regarding your proposal. His scales briefly flashed with colors that Nora couldn't interpret. It has been approved, with certain conditions. You will be granted access to the Helix Codex and other major precursor artifacts for a trial period of 1 standard galactic year. During this time, you will work with a team of senior archivists to apply your analytical framework and document the results. Nora felt a surge of excitement. That's wonderful news. Thank you for advocating on my behalf. I merely presented the facts, Telzak replied, though Nora detected a hint of pleasure in his harmonic undertones. Your work speaks for itself. However, I should warn you that not all council members are convinced. Some view your methods as unorthodox at best, dangerously subjective at worst. They have agreed to this trial period primarily to confirm or refute your initial findings. I understand, said Nora. Scientific skepticism is healthy. I wouldn't expect anything less. Telzak's scales shifted to a more informal pattern. There is one other matter I wish to discuss with you, of a more personal nature. Oh, Nora raised an eyebrow, curious. I have studied human history since your species joined the galactic community, said Telzak. A fascinating chronicle, if rather brief by our standards. One thing that has always intrigued me is humanity's persistent drive to explore and discover, often at great personal risk. Your people ventured into space long before your technology was truly ready for such endeavors. We've always been impatient, Nora acknowledged with a smile. For better or worse. Perhaps it is this very impatience that gives you your unique perspective, Telzak mused. The Zentari spend decades contemplating a single question. The Nravari may devote centuries to the perfection of a particular analytical method. Humans leap forward, sometimes stumbling, but always moving. That's a generous way of describing our recklessness, Nora said with a laugh. Not recklessness, courage, corrected Telzak. The willingness to risk error in pursuit of truth. It is a quality that many of the elder species have perhaps forgotten. His scales rippled with a color Nora had never seen before, a deep, iridescent gold that seemed to glow from within. I believe your work with the precursor artifacts may teach us more than just their history, Dr. Ellis. It may remind us of something important about ourselves as well. With that surprisingly philosophical observation, Telzak bid her good night, leaving Nora to contemplate the unexpected direction her career had taken. When she had accepted the consortium's invitation, offered almost as an afterthought during a xenolinguistics conference on Earth, she had expected, at best, to gain some valuable research experience and forge professional connections. Instead, she found herself at the center of what might prove to be the most significant breakthrough in precursor studies in centuries. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as Nora worked with an expanding team of researchers to apply her methodologies to other precursor artifacts. The Helix Codex, a spiral-shaped object recovered from an abandoned precursor outpost in the Andromeda Galaxy, had defied conventional analysis for over 15 centuries. Under Nora's guidance, the team began to identify patterns similar to those found in the Archimedean matrix. It's like a companion piece, Nora explained to Telzak as they observed the new pattern taking shape in the quantum resonance chamber. Where the matrix tells the story of the precursor's discovery of the transcendent realm, the Codex explains the physics of it, how the realm interfaces with our reality, and how consciousness can be transferred between the two. Extraordinary, murmured Telzak, his scales pulsing with excited blues and greens. If your interpretation is correct, this could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness itself. That's the most interesting part, Nora replied. According to the Codex, consciousness isn't something that emerges from physical complexity. It's a fundamental property of the universe, like mass or energy. Our brains don't create consciousness. They channel it, like antennas receiving a signal. Telzak contemplated this for a moment. Such a concept exists in several species' philosophical traditions, including some Zentari schools of thought. But to find it described in scientific terms by the precursors, it challenges our assumptions about the boundary between science and philosophy, Nora agreed. But that's exactly what I was talking about before. The precursors didn't make those distinctions the way we do. For them, the subjective experience of consciousness was just as real and measurable as gravitational waves or quantum probabilities. As their work progressed, word of the breakthroughs spread beyond the archives, capturing the imagination of the wider galactic community. Scholars from thousands of worlds requested permission to observe or participate in the research. Politicians and cultural leaders began to speculate about the implications of contacting a transcended civilization. Religious groups debated whether the transcendent realm might be equivalent to various concepts of afterlife or spiritual dimensions in their traditions. Amid this growing excitement, Nora found herself becoming something of a celebrity, the human who had solved a mystery that had confounded the galaxy's greatest minds for millennia. She was invited to give lectures at prestigious institutions across multiple star systems, interviewed by news agencies from dozens of species, and even offered substantial sums to write a popular account of her discoveries. She declined most of these opportunities, preferring to focus on her research, but the attention was impossible to escape entirely. It was also, she had to admit, not entirely unwelcome. There was a certain satisfaction in seeing the initial skepticism and condescension of many elder species transform into genuine respect. "You've become quite the interstellar sensation," remarked Kazesti during one of their research sessions. The Nravari archivist had been among the most skeptical of Nora's methods initially, but had gradually become one of her strongest supporters as the evidence mounted. "I understand the human information networks are buzzing with stories of your achievements. It's mostly exaggerated," Nora replied with a dismissive wave. "You know how these things get amplified in the telling." "Perhaps," said Katie, her mandibles moving in what Nora had come to recognize as a gesture of amusement. "But exaggerated or not, your work has captured the imagination of many species, not just your own. There is something compelling about the idea that a newcomer to the galactic community could perceive what the elder species missed for so long. It's not about being smarter," Nora said carefully. "It's about having a different perspective. Humans don't have your computational abilities or your lifespans, so we've evolved to make intuitive leaps, to see patterns quickly, even if we can't always explain why or how. An adaptation to your biological limitations," KZZT observed. "Fascinating. The Nravari have always valued methodical precision over intuitive insight. Perhaps there is merit in both approaches." 6 months into the project, the team made another breakthrough when they successfully applied Nora's analytical framework to the temporal inscriptions from Proxima Centauri 7. Unlike the Matrix and the Codex, which focused on the precursor's relationship with the transcendent realm, the inscriptions contained detailed information about their technological achievements, including the principles behind their mastery of gravity, spacetime, and energy generation. "This is remarkable," said Veln as he studied the translated sections. "If our interpretation is correct, the precursors had developed methods of energy generation that make our most advanced antimatter reactors look like primitive combustion engines." "And look at this section on gravitational manipulation," added another researcher, a gas phase entity named Zoff, whose translucent body rippled with excitement. "They weren't just counteracting gravity. They were reshaping the underlying fabric of spacetime itself. The engineering applications alone could transform galactic civilization," said Telzak. "More efficient star drives, better planetary terraforming, new approaches to habitat construction." "We should proceed cautiously," warned Kate. "Remember that the precursors had millions of years to develop and refine these technologies. Attempting to replicate them without fully understanding the principles involved could be dangerous." "I agree," said Nora. "But I think the real value here goes beyond specific technologies. It's about understanding a different way of approaching problems, seeing the connections between phenomena that we've always treated as separate." As the one-year trial period neared its end, the team had successfully translated major portions of over 30 precursor artifacts, each one adding to their understanding of this vanished civilization. The picture that emerged was of a species that had achieved a level of integration, technological, cultural, and cognitive, that made the distinctions between science, art, philosophy, and spirituality all but meaningless. The final council session to evaluate the project's results was scheduled for the anniversary of Nora's first presentation. As the date approached, she found herself working ever longer hours, determined to present the most comprehensive and convincing case possible. "You should rest," said Telzak, finding her still in the quantum resonance chamber late one night, surrounded by swirling patterns of light. "Even humans require sleep, I believe." Nora smiled tiredly. "I just want to make sure we've covered everything. The council will be looking for any weaknesses in our methodology, any inconsistencies in our interpretations." "The evidence speaks for itself," Telzak assured her. "You have accomplished more in 1 year than the consortium achieved in centuries. Even the most skeptical council members have been forced to acknowledge the value of your approach." "It's not just about proving myself right," Nora said, gesturing to the complex patterns around them. "It's about doing justice to what the precursors left behind. They created something beautiful here, not just information but experience, not just facts but meaning. I want the council to see that, to feel it the way I do." Telzak's scales shifted to the deep gold color she had seen only once before. "I believe they will, Dr. Ellis. You have taught us to see with new eyes." The day of the council session arrived, and Nora found herself once again standing before representatives of the galaxy's oldest and most respected civilizations. This time, however, the assembly hall was filled beyond capacity, with thousands of additional observers watching via a holographic projection from other locations throughout the archives. "Dr. Nora Ellis," began Chairperson Morvac, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "1 year ago, you stood before this council and proposed a radical new approach to the study of precursor artifacts. You challenged methodologies that had been established for millennia and suggested that a human perspective might yield insights that had eluded the combined efforts of hundreds of species over thousands of years." He paused, his scales shifting through a complex sequence of colors. Many doubted. Some scoffed. "Yet today, we convene to evaluate the results of your work, and I believe even the most skeptical among us must acknowledge that those results are extraordinary." A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. Morvac continued, "The council has reviewed the comprehensive report submitted by Chief Archivist Telzak and the research team. We have examined the translations of 37 major precursor artifacts, the technological and scientific insights derived from those translations, and the new methodological framework that made these breakthroughs possible." Another pause, longer this time. "It is the unanimous finding of this council that Dr. Ellis's work represents the most significant advancement in precursor studies since the founding of the consortium. The analytical framework she has developed will henceforth be incorporated into all aspects of our research, and her specific translations are hereby accepted as the official consortium interpretation of the artifacts in question." Applause erupted from all corners of the chamber, a cacophony of sounds as hundreds of species expressed approval in their own ways. Nora felt a surge of emotion, pride, relief, and a profound sense of connection to the ancient civilization whose voice she had helped to recover. "Dr. Ellis," Morvac continued when the noise had subsided, "in recognition of your extraordinary contributions, the Council hereby offers you the position of Principal Researcher in the newly established Division of Integrative Xenolinguistics. In this role, you will oversee the application of your methodologies to the full corpus of precursor artifacts and train researchers from all member species in your analytical techniques." Nora stepped forward, momentarily overwhelmed by the offer. "Chairperson, members of the Council, I am deeply honored by your recognition and by this opportunity. I accept with gratitude and with an awareness of the responsibility it entails." She took a deep breath before continuing. "The precursors left behind more than artifacts. They left a perspective, a way of seeing and experiencing reality that transcends the boundaries we've created between disciplines and domains of knowledge. Their language wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a framework for integration, a means of bringing together what we have pulled apart." Nora gestured to the holographic displays showing the translated artifacts. "What we've discovered so far is just the beginning. The precursors' story, their journey from a physical species like ourselves to beings that transcended the very constraints of matter and energy, challenges our most fundamental assumptions about consciousness, intelligence, and the nature of existence itself." She looked out at the assembled representatives of hundreds of species, each with their own evolutionary history, their own cognitive strengths and limitations, their own perspective on reality. "Perhaps the most important lesson we can learn from the precursors is that diversity of perspective isn't just valuable, it's essential. No single species, no matter how ancient or advanced, can perceive all facets of reality. It's only by bringing our perspectives together, by learning to see through each other's eyes, that we can hope to glimpse the whole." As Nora concluded her address, the chamber erupted once more in a symphony of approval. In that moment, surrounded by beings whose evolutionary paths had diverged from her own billions of years ago, she felt a profound connection, not just to them, but to the ancient civilization whose voice she had helped recover from the silence of time. In the months and years that followed, Nora's work at the archives transformed not just the study of precursor artifacts, but the very nature of interspecies scholarship throughout the galaxy. The division of integrative xenolinguistics became a model for collaborative research, bringing together cognitive approaches from hundreds of species to tackle problems that had resisted solution for millennia. The translations of precursor technology led to significant advancements in energy production, space-time manipulation, and consciousness studies. More importantly, the philosophical insights embedded in their language began to influence galactic culture, encouraging a more integrated approach to knowledge and experience across diverse civilizations. 10 years after her initial breakthrough, Nora stood on the observation deck of the archives, looking out at the spectacular vista of the galactic core. Beside her stood Telzak, his once vibrant scales now fading slightly with age but still capable of expressing the complex emotions of his species. "The Council has approved the Transcendence Initiative," he informed her, his scales rippling with colors that conveyed both excitement and trepidation. "Based on your team's translation of the Ascension protocols from the Sirius artifacts, we will attempt to establish contact with the precursors in the Transcendent Realm." Nora nodded, feeling a mixture of anticipation and concern. Are we ready for such a step? Contact with a post-physical civilization could have profound implications for galactic society. "That is precisely why the Council has requested that you lead the initiative," replied Telzak. "Your ability to bridge perspectives, to understand both the technical aspects and the experiential dimensions, makes you uniquely qualified for this task." Nora turned her gaze back to the swirling stars of the galactic core, where the precursors had built their greatest achievements before transcending the physical universe altogether. Somewhere beyond the light and matter visible to her eyes, they might still exist, watching, waiting, perhaps even guiding the younger civilizations that had come after them. 10 years ago, I was just a linguist with an unusual perspective," she said softly. "Now I'm preparing to make contact with beings that transcended physical existence 30 million years ago. It's a lot to process." "You have always excelled at processing the unexpected," Telzak observed, his scales shifting to the now familiar deep gold that indicated profound respect. "That is your gift, to see patterns where others see only chaos, to find meaning where others find only noise." "Not just my gift," Nora corrected him gently. "Humanity's gift, perhaps. We've had to be adaptable, to make intuitive leaps, to find shortcuts where other species could afford to take the long, methodical path. A gift the galaxy needed, though we did not know it," said Telzak. "The precursors left their legacy for all of us, but it took human eyes to truly see it." As they stood together, contemplating the vastness of space and time, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A simple invitation, offered almost as an afterthought. A dead language that had resisted translation for millennia, and a human perspective that had bridged the gap between worlds, between past and present, between matter and consciousness, between what was and what might yet be. They had studied a dead language for ages, but for Nora, it had always been alive, speaking across the eons in patterns and rhythms that resonated with the deepest parts of human cognition. Not a code to be broken, but a song to be heard, a story to be experienced, a perspective to be shared. And in sharing that perspective, in learning to see through the eyes of an ancient civilization that had transcended physical existence itself, perhaps the diverse species of the galaxy might discover a new kind of unity, a harmony of perspectives that was greater than any single way of knowing could ever be. "The Transcendence Initiative will begin next month," said Telzak, interrupting her thoughts. "There is much to prepare." Nora smiled. "Then we'd better get to work. The precursors have waited 30 million years for this conversation. It would be rude to keep them waiting any longer." And as they turned to leave, the stars of the galactic core seemed to pulse with a subtle rhythm, like symbols in an ancient language, telling stories that had yet to be heard. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.